I'd already made 2 calls to the marina before I understood what I was actually helping do. $42,000. That's what my parents decided my grandfather's boat was worth toward my brother's wedding, worth more, apparently, than asking him first. The invoice that finally stopped me showed a new slipholder name where my grandfather's had sat for 30 years. Closing date, 3 days away. If you've ever been the one your family hands a folder to and says, "Just handle it," you already know how fast that trust turns into something you didn't sign up for. I'm the one my family calls when there's paperwork to untangle. 11 years reading fine print for a living will do that to your reputation. My parents had told me Grandpa Walter already agreed to the sale, that I was only smoothing over details so he wouldn't have to deal with the hassle before the wedding. So that same morning, I'd called the marina's transfer office myself, using the same clean, procedural voice I use every day processing insurance claims, and told them I was authorized to help finalize things. Then I called Walter, just to confirm the timeline, just to be helpful. "Sell the Marion B," he said, and I could hear him actually laugh at the idea. "Why would I sell my own boat, Claire? I'm taking her out this weekend. Bilge pump's been acting up, but she runs fine." I sat there in my kitchen holding the phone, my own voice from an hour earlier still echoing in my ear, telling a marina clerk I had the authority to close a sale my grandfather had never agreed to. Someone had lied to me. Or I had already helped someone lie to him. I'll tell you what I did next in a minute. First, you should know how my family ended up trusting me with that folder in the first place, because I hadn't planned on using that trust to help sell my own grandfather's boat out from under him. I just hadn't realized, yet, that was what I was doing. The whole thing had started 3 weeks earlier, at a family dinner that was supposed to be about cake tastings. Tyler's wedding to Ashley was 6 weeks away, and the budget had crept from modest and lovely to something closer to a small mortgage, mostly because Ashley's mother kept suggesting upgrades and my mother kept saying yes so nobody would think our side of the family was cheaper. My father, Gary, brought it up between the second and third course, casual as weather. "Dad's boat is basically just sitting there costing us money in slip fees," he said. "He barely takes her out since Mom passed. Might be time to talk to him about it." Nobody at that table said the boat wasn't ours to talk about. I didn't either, and that's the part one keep coming back to. The Marion B had been my grandparents' boat since before I was born, named for my grandmother the year they bought her. I learned to bait a hook on that boat. Walter had refused, gently, to turn it into a memorial instead of a place he still wanted to use. "She'd hate that," he told me once. "She always said a boat that never leaves the dock is just an expensive umbrella." A week after that dinner, my father asked me to handle the paperwork side of the sale, since I was good at this stuff and it would spare Walter the hassle of a transaction he'd supposedly already agreed to. He handed me a folder. Inside was a document authorizing someone to act on Walter's behalf, the buyer's name, Denny Farrow, and a number, $42,000. Enough to cover the venue upgrade Ashley's mother wanted. "He said yes to this?" I asked. "He's tired of dealing with the marina," my father said. "You know how he gets about details. Just help it go smoothly." I didn't call Walter to check. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy to tell this story as though I was innocent from the first page. I wasn't. I made 2 calls to Cedar Harbor's transfer office that week, confirming details, using language I use every day at work, the kind of language that makes a clerk stop asking questions because you clearly know what you're talking about. It wasn't until the invoice landed in my inbox by mistake, 3 days before closing, that anything in me actually stopped to look. After I hung up with Walter, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. If he hadn't agreed to the sale, then the paperwork my father had given me wasn't a formality. It was something else, and I had already helped move it forward. I called my mother first, telling myself I wanted an explanation that would make this make sense. "He's agreed to it, Claire," in his own way, Paula said, her voice already sharpening into the tone she uses when she's decided not to be embarrassed about something. He told your father months ago he was thinking about downsizing. We're just moving faster than he expected. He just told me he's taking it out this weekend. There was a pause. Sometimes he forgets what he's agreed to, she said. You know how he's gotten since your grandmother. That sentence landed wrong in a way I couldn't name yet. Walter had never once, in 4 years of phone calls and Sunday dinners, forgotten anything I'd told him. If anything, he remembered things I wished he'd forget. I asked to see the authorization paperwork again, properly this time, not just skimmed in a rush between wedding errands. Stay with me. This is where it gets quiet, and where I stopped believing my own family's version of events. My mother keeps a shared email folder for wedding vendors, one I have edit access to because I've been helping coordinate the caterer. That night, looking for a florist invoice, I found something else sitting in the drafts folder, a bill of sale for the Marion B, $42,000, buyer Denny Farrow, seller Walter Boyd. The authorization line referenced a power of attorney, dated 2 years back. I recognized the document number immediately, because I'd helped my mother locate the original 2 years ago. It was the medical power of attorney Walter signed before his hip replacement, so Gary could make emergency medical decisions if something went wrong on the table. Nothing in it mentioned finances. Nothing in it mentioned property. It had one purpose, and it had expired the day Walter walked out of the hospital on his own 2 legs. Someone had used a surgical consent form to sign away a boat. I didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, I drove to my parents' house instead of calling. My father answered the door already looking like a man who'd been rehearsing his defense. You went through your mother's email, he said, which told me more than any explanation would have. You used Grandpa's medical POA to sell his boat, I said. That's not what it's for, Dad. That's not what any of this is for. He would have said yes eventually, Gary said, and I watched him actually believe it as he said it. He doesn't use that boat the way he used to. We were helping Tyler. We were going to explain it to him after the wedding, once everything was settled and he didn't have anything to be upset about. You were going to tell him after you'd already spent his money. It's not his money if he wasn't using the asset, my father said, and for a second I honestly think he heard how that sounded, and chose not to take it back anyway. Your grandfather doesn't need a boat, Claire. He needs a family that's still speaking to each other after this wedding is paid for. I asked him who Denny Farrow was. My father's jaw tightened before he answered. Old friend of the family. Marina broker. He's helped move things along faster than a stranger would have. Faster. That word sat with me the whole drive home. I called Denny that afternoon, telling him I was following up on the closing paperwork, the same professional register I'd used with the marina clerk. He must have assumed I already knew everything, because he didn't hedge at all. Gary asked me to get this done quiet, before the wedding, Denny said. Said it'd be easier on Walter if it was already finished instead of something he had to sit and decide on. I figured, well, family's family. I've known Walter 30 years. Didn't think there was any harm speeding the paperwork along. I asked him, carefully, whether he'd ever spoken to Walter directly about any of it. The silence on the line answered before he did. Your dad said he'd handle that part, Denny finally said. Nobody had handled that part. That was the entire point. I hung up and sat in my car in my own driveway for 20 minutes before I went inside. Every call I'd made that week replayed in my head, my own voice, competent and clear, exactly the voice a marina clerk or an old family friend would trust without a second thought. Being the reliable one had always felt, to me, like something to be proud of. That week, for the first time, it felt like something someone else had quietly been counting on. I didn't call my parents again that night. I called Walter's attorney's office instead and asked whether Harold Voss had any time that week, for something that couldn't really wait for an appointment slot 2 months out. The next morning, I drove to Walter's house myself. He was on the porch fixing a fishing reel, unbothered, the way he always looked when nobody had told him yet that his own family had decided something about his life without him. "There's something about the boat you need to see for yourself," I told him. "Can you come with me to Harold's office?" He looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look that told me he already suspected something, and had simply been waiting for someone to bring it to him instead of around him. Harold Voss had been Walter's attorney for over 20 years, a soft-spoken man with an office that smelled like old coffee and older paper. He listened while I laid out the bill of sale, the POA reference, the marina invoice, watching Walter's face rather than mine the whole time. I'll admit, walking into that office, I thought I already knew how this was going to go. I was about to find out how wrong I was. When I finished, Harold didn't look surprised. That was the first thing that struck me as strange. "Walter," he said, "did you want to tell her, or should I?" Walter set his hands flat on the desk, the way he does when he's about to say something he's already made peace with. 2 years ago, right after Marion passed, I put the Marion B into a trust, he said. The Marion Boyd Memorial Trust funds a junior sailing scholarship down at the marina, for kids who can't afford lessons otherwise. Been meaning to tell the family properly, once the paperwork settled. Guess I never got around to it. Harold pulled the file and turned it around so I could read it myself. The boat had been titled to the trust for 2 years. Walter was the trustee. Nobody could sell it, medical power of attorney or otherwise, because nobody else had the legal standing to. The bill of sale my father and Denny had arranged wasn't just unauthorized. It was void from the moment it was signed, because the asset it claimed to transfer hadn't belonged to Walter personally in years. My grandfather, the one my mother had described as someone who forgets what he's agreed to, had quietly protected the one thing that mattered most to him while he was still grieving his wife, years before anyone in this family thought to test whether he could. I sat there in Harold's office feeling something shift that I couldn't fully name yet, some mixture of relief and grief and a strange, sharp pride in a man everyone else in my family had underestimated, including, until that morning, me. "I'd like the notice drafted formally," Walter said to Harold, calm as I'd ever heard him. "And Claire, I'd like you to be the one who brings it to your father. Not because I can't. Because I think you need to see this through, the way you started it." I asked him if he was angry. "I'm 78 years old," he said. "I buried my wife 4 years ago on a Tuesday and went out on that boat the following Saturday because staying home felt worse. I've got room left in me for disappointed. I don't have much room left for angry." 2 days before the wedding, Walter and I drove to my parents' house together, Harold's formal notice in a folder on my lap. My father opened the door already looking older than he had that morning I'd confronted him about the POA, as if some part of him had known this exact conversation was still coming. "Dad," he started, and Walter held up a hand before he could get further. "I know what you did, Gary," Walter said. "I know why you did it. I even understand it, a little, which might be the part that stings you most when you think about it later. But that boat's never been mine to give away on your say-so, and it was never yours to sell on mine." Harold's notice was simple: the sale was void, the funds Denny had begun processing would need to be reversed, and any further transaction involving the Marion B required trustee authorization that only Walter could provide. My mother's voice went thin and fast, the way it does when she's cornered. "We were going to tell him. We were always going to tell him." "After," Walter said. "You were going to tell me after. That's the part one keep turning over, Paula. Not that you needed money. That you decided I was easier to manage than to ask." Tyler walked in partway through, still in his work clothes, 2 days from his own wedding, and had to stand in his parents' kitchen and hear exactly how the venue upgrade his fiancée's mother wanted had almost been paid for. He didn't say much. He looked at his father for a long moment, then at Walter, and said, quietly, "Grandpa, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "I know you didn't, son," Walter said, and for the first time that evening, something in his voice softened. "This isn't on you." My father tried, twice, to argue that the trust paperwork was recent, that nobody could have known, that it wasn't fair to call this premeditated when they genuinely believed Walter would have said yes. Walter let him finish both times. He didn't raise his voice once. He simply waited until Gary ran out of reasons, and then asked him, plainly, how he planned to cover what was left of the wedding now that the boat money wasn't coming. Nobody had an answer to that yet. It wasn't Walter's job to give them one. Denny Farrow's insurance covered the refund once his broker's errors and omissions policy kicked in, since the transfer had been processed without valid legal authority on either end. My parents spent the 4 days before the wedding making calls I wasn't part of, trimming vendors, moving numbers around, doing without the venue upgrade that had started all of this. Ashley's mother was disappointed. Ashley, when Tyler finally told her the real reason for the change, was furious at my parents in a way that made me like her considerably more than I already had. Walter still came to the wedding. He wore the tie Marion had picked out for him years earlier for occasions exactly like this one, and during the reception, he stood up, uninvited, and told the room he wanted to pay for one thing himself, Tyler and Ashley's honeymoon send-off dinner, the night before they left. Nobody argued with him. Nobody, I think, would have dared. My relationship with my parents since then has settled into something civil, careful, not quite repaired. I still answer their calls. I still show up at holidays. But I don't take a folder from my father anymore without asking, first, whether the person it's actually about has agreed to what's inside it. That question sounds small. It has changed nearly every conversation I've had with my parents since. A few weeks after the wedding, Walter asked me to come by the marina with him. We didn't talk about the sale, or Gary, or any of it. We just took the Marion B out at dusk, the way we used to when I was young enough to think a fishing trip was the whole world. On the way back in, the light caught the transom just right, Marion's name in the same hand-painted letters Walter had touched up himself every spring for 30 years. He put my hand on the wheel next to his, steady, and didn't let go until we were most of the way to the slip. Later that week, Harold sent over a short amendment to the trust. Walter had named a successor trustee. Not my father. Me. He didn't make a speech about it. He just told me, over coffee, that he'd rather the boat end up with someone who'd asked the hard question before doing him a favor, than someone who'd assumed the favor was already owed. If you'd been in my shoes, standing in that kitchen holding a folder your own father handed you, would you have made the calls I made, or would you have picked up the phone and asked your grandfather first? I still don't think there's an easy answer, and I'm not sure I'd judge anyone too harshly either way. I just know which choice I'll make the next time somebody hands me a folder and tells me it's already settled. Subscribe to Broken Bonds, and I'll see you at the next one.